Good evening. Great to be with you on Yom Hamishi, the 5th day, Thursday. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house as we come to the last page of Tractate Nazir? Bill in mid-Missouri, Lucy in Minnesota, Bella in Florida, Leona in Illinois, Paul in the Great Northwest, Peggy in Colorado, Nancy in North Carolina, Paula says shalom, Melissa in Great Neck, Stephen in New Hampshire. No, shalom from somewhere over the U.S., a little behind, but I will try to catch up. Sandy from Michigan, Franco checking in from Trieste, Italy. Welcome, Franco. Pam in Oregon, Ryan wishing everyone a good evening. I am excited for the great Shabbos, Shabbos Hagadol, this Shabbos. Traditionally, there was a time when rabbis didn't make a sermon every Shabbos. They just did it twice a year, and this is one of them. The other one being between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Belle here in Texas with the usual furry kids. Sharon in New Jersey. Talmud Katsi and I are ready here in Lebanon, New Jersey. David in South Bend, Indiana. Joseph in Massachusetts. Joe in the Inland Empire. Marjorie in Georgia. Marie in Freeport. Welcome, everybody. We are doing the last page of Tractate Nazir, but we're not finishing the tractate. As I've mentioned a couple of times, we're going to save the final Mishna and its short Gemara, the final Sugya, the final passage for next Wednesday morning. And anyone who is a firstborn would have to make a fast on that day. But if you attend a Sudas mitzvah, a mitzvah meal, then you don't have to fast that day. And if you have a meal pertaining to somebody making a siyum, a conclusion on a tractate of Talmud, then that overrides the fast. So we'll make our little celebration and our siyum on Tractate Nazir on Wednesday morning, and that's going to be 10 a.m. Pacific unless something changes. Make sure you subscribe to the 18 newsletter, and we'll publish the holiday schedule as well. accidentaltalmudist.org. You can subscribe to the email bulletin. Okay, let's do this. We are picking it up on 65b of Tractate Nazir with Mishna number 7, the penultimate Mishna of our tractate. And then Mishna number 8 will be the one we do at the Siyum next week. Mishna number 7. So this Mishnah discusses another case that includes the statement, there is a basis to anticipate the matter. And we saw that yesterday with regard to here in Tractate Nazir, you know that a Nazir is prohibited to become impure for the dead. Therefore, we have to know where graves are so that he doesn't walk over a grave accidentally and become impure and then have to restart his Naziris. So in Mishnah number 6 that we were talking about yesterday, 5 and 6, we had the case of somebody is digging a hole, maybe building a building, a waterway, whatever, and he finds a body, he finds a corpse. So the job is to take that corpse and put it in a regular cemetery with great respect. If he finds 2 corpses, he moves them to a cemetery. If he finds 3 corpses, now he has to start thinking, this is a cemetery that I have uncovered, some kind of ancient forgotten cemetery. If the bodies are aligned in the same direction and they're not buried in some kind of odd position like seated or curled up, so then we have good reason to believe that this may be a cemetery. How far does the cemetery extend? So we go 20 cubits in every direction away from where the bodies were found. And if we don't have any more corpses, then that's it. We don't have to keep looking for a cemetery. But if we do find more bodies, then we have reason to anticipate that we would find even more bodies, and we have to keep extending the boundary of this potential, of this cemetery that we've discovered 20 cubits away from the last body found in that, in that dig, as it were, even archaeological dig. Okay, so based on this phrase, reason to anticipate the matter, right? Reason to make an assumption, right? We have good cause to make an assumption that there may be more bodies. And just using this phrase, this is going to trigger a completely different body of law, literally about the human body, but where we have established some kind of a reasonable presumption or a reasonable assumption. And then what does this cause? What does this imply? So mission number 7 is going to be related to the laws of the zav and the zava. And we've mentioned them a few times. So this is another form of ritual impurity, right? You become ritually impure if you touch a corpse, walk over a grave, cause a corpse to be moved, and then you can't enter the holy temple or eat consecrated food if you're a priest until you undergo the 7-day purification. Other sources of tuma, ritual impurity, include a dead creeping thing, which is not going to cause this 7-day, a tuma that requires a 7-day purification. It's a much lighter kind of ritual impurity that will result in you have to immerse in the mikvah, and then that night when the sun sets, you're pure again and you could enter the temple or eat consecrated food. A woman who is having her menses is a source of ritual impurity. Just what else have we talked about? Just sources of ritual impurity. Also, if a man has a seminal discharge, right? I mean, it's a beautiful thing. We're all commanded to be fruitful and multiply. But a man who has had an emission, even in the course of lovemaking, becomes impure thereby, then he'll have to immerse in the mikvah and await nightfall before he could enter the temple when the temple is standing. Now, that's a seminal discharge. If he has a discharge that's neither urine nor semen, but some other kind of substance, the word sebaceous comes to mind, but I actually don't even know what that word means, so why would I use it? Some kind of substance that is neither semen nor urine that emerges from the male member. So this could be, and it's often called a gonorrhea-like discharge. So this would be a source of impurity. And if he has repeated discharges, then the level of impurity goes up. And it's because with the repeated discharges, we have reason to assume that he is more likely a zav rather than just somebody who had, a seminal emission outside of lovemaking. Semen, no matter what the circumstances are, is impure, is a source of impurity, but it does not carry the level of ritual impurity that ziva. Ziva is this substance, that's the Hebrew word for it, that if a man has enough of these emissions, he becomes a zav. The word zava, ziva is the substance in a man. Zava is the term for a woman who has similar implications and similar needs to go through a ritual purification, but women don't have this ziva emission. Women have, menses outside of their expected time of the month. So if a woman spots or bleeds outside of what would normally be her period, then she could become a zava, and she would become a source of impurity, like the man becomes a source of impurity. And so that's what we're referring to when we say a zava. But right now we're talking about the zav, the man who has these emissions. So one examines a man who experienced ziva, right? So a man who becomes a zav. One examines a man who experienced a gonorrhea-like discharge in seven ways, as long as he has not been confirmed as having gonorrhea-like discharge, right? So he's had some substance emerge from him. It might be semen. It might not. It's, almost surely not urine, but it's something. And, it's not like you can look at it and say, that's ziva. Ziva does not always happen. And as we'll see, there are circumstances identified in the Talmud that could cause a man to have some kind of emission that is not ziva. And so that's why they're saying that we look at 7 factors that might cause a man to have an emission that is not ziva. So that's what we're looking at. So with regard to an individual's second such discharge, before he has been established as a greater zav, one examines to see whether there may have been a particular trigger of his discharge. What are these triggers? One examines him with regard to food. Perhaps a food that he ate caused him to have a discharge, or something that he drank. Or perhaps he was lifting a heavy burden, or perhaps he was jumping up and down, or perhaps he has some kind of an illness, or perhaps he had an arousing visual sight that aroused him sexually, or perhaps he had an arousing thought that caused him to have some kind of emission. That would be some version of semen or preflow or something like that would not be ziva, which is something else more related to gonorrhea-like discharge. So once he has been confirmed as emitting ziva after 2 definite discharges of this substance, then one no longer examines him in this way, as any discharge is deemed impure. Right now, any further discharge that he has, now that we've established that he's emitted ziva twice, so the third time we don't have to ask all these questions, could it have been caused by one of these other factors? Since he's already emitted ziva twice, the third time that it's ziva-like substance, we assume that it is ziva. And that's where we have a reason to assume, right? A basis to anticipate the matter, which is what connects this Mishnah to the previous one. So once he has been confirmed as having a ziva emission, one no longer examines him in this way. Accordingly, his discharge that was due to circumstances beyond his control, i.e. for one of those 7 reasons listed above, and his discharge about which it is uncertain if it is ziva, and even his semen, which is not usually considered the discharge of a zav, all of these are now assumed to be the discharge of a zav. Why is this so? It is because there is basis for anticipating the matter. Once he has the status of a zav, it can be assumed that the subsequent discharges are ziva as well. So the sage is similarly taught with regard to one who strikes another person. Totally different area of the law now. Now we're talking about murder, sort of like, that doesn't result in immediate death, right? But where a person strikes another person in a way that doesn't kill him right away, but let's say it puts him in the hospital and then he succumbs to the injury later, is that murder that leads to capital punishment or not? So with regard to one who strikes another with heavy blows, and doctors assess that the person would die as a result of the beating, but the victim's health improved from what it was, so that they then determined that he would not die from his injuries. But afterward, his condition worsened, and he did die. So then the one who struck him is liable to receive court-imposed capital punishment. You can almost see that this would be like a traumatic brain injury, and then sometimes, like he right away he's not feeling well, but he gets some rest, and then, he seems to be up and around, but there was a brain injury that was not noticeable right away. And then, they didn't have x-rays and hospitals and brain surgery, and it could easily happen that a few days later the person collapses and dies. So in that case, we deem that the one who struck him that blow that he seemed to be getting better from is in fact the murderer and is liable to capital punishment. Rabbi Nehemiah says, no, he's exempt because there is a basis for anticipating the matter. Since the victim began to recover during his illness, it is reasonable to assume that his death was caused by some factor other than the assault. So Rabbi Nehemiah is using the same principle of reason to anticipate the matter because this person seemed to be on the mend. But Rabbi Nehemiah was in the minority on this, and the law came out like the majority that said, no, if this guy gets better, but then he gets worse and dies, we're going to blame the one who gave him such a beating that it could have killed him, and the doctors thought it would kill him. And in fact, it did kill him. That's the Mishnah. Here's the Gemara. The Gemara asks, from where are these matters derived regarding the zav? That one examines a zav before he has been confirmed as having a ziva emission, but not after. And Rabbi Nassan says that the verse states, Leviticus 15:33, and the zav who has an issue, zav es zovo, whether it is a man or a woman, right? So that's why we're talking about the woman is having irregular bleeding, the man is having this gonorrhea-like discharge. So this teaches that after, because of the language in Hebrew, zav es zovo, and this teaches that after 2 discharges corresponding to the words zav and zovo, with regard to the third sighting, when one is already a zav, the verse juxtaposes the law of a male to that of a female. And just as it makes no difference in the case of a female whether her discharge of menstrual blood was triggered by an external factor, as she is ritually impure regardless, now that we've established that she's had 2 prior discharges. So once a male zav has the status of a zav, and therefore he is ritually impure, one no longer examines him to see if his discharge was triggered by some external factor. We have reason to assume that this is ziva because we've already established twice that he emitted ziva. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it taught in a Mishna, in Tractate Zavim, that Rabbi Eliezer says, for the 3rd discharge, one still examines him. For the 4th discharge, one does not examine him. Right? The majority say if he's done it twice, the 3rd time we assume that's ziva. Rabbi Eliezer says we don't establish this principle with 2 occurrences, rather with 3. If he has ziva 3 times, then on the 4th time we can assume that it is also ziva, but not after twice. According to Rabbi Eliezer, he's in the minority on this. And for the 3rd discharge, says Rabbi Eliezer, one still examines him, but for the 4th, one does not examine him. And where does the verse allude to the 4th discharge? And the Gemara answers, rather, they disagree with regard to instances of the word es or et, right? Most people would, in modern Hebrew would pronounce that et. Ashkenaz Hebrew, they would pronounce it es. But this is aleph taf. Right? So aleph taf, the first and last letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And it's this word that is not translated. It's not normally translated because it's like a helper word. You know, when you say, I threw the ball in Hebrew, or let's say I punched the door. Let's say I punched the door, right? And so in Hebrew, my Hebrew's not good enough to just actually translate that right away. But what I'm telling you is that when there's a direct object of a verb, so then there's this helper word in Hebrew, aleph taf, that comes in between the verb and the direct object, letting you know that a direct object is coming. So when you translate that sentence, even though in Hebrew there's an extra word, in English you would just say, I punched the door, not I punched the door, right? And so this word et, occurs in the Bible thousands of times. Some of the sages will find an additional meaning when this word is used, and other sages don't. So Rabbi Eliezer expounds instances of the word et, and therefore he counts the phrase zav et zovo as 3 words referring to 3 discharges. And the rabbis do not expound instances of the word et, which means that in their opinion, this verse alludes to only 2 discharges before we make an assumption that the 3rd one is also ziva. So the Mishnah taught that the zav's discharge that was due to circumstances beyond it, this man's discharge that was due to circumstances beyond his control, and his discharge about which it is uncertain whether it is ziva or not, are considered impure. And Rava said, do not say that it is uncertain whether he saw a discharge and uncertain whether he did not see it. The uncertainty is not with regard to whether he experienced a discharge at all. Rather, he certainly saw a discharge, but it is uncertain whether the discharge was due to, i.e. defined as, an emission of semen, and it is uncertain whether the discharge was due to the sighting of ziva. So in this case, once he has been confirmed as being ritually impure as a zav, his uncertain case is also impure. So let me just read a little bit further background on the zav so that this passage makes a little more sense. And here's just a nice explanation from Rav Steinsaltz. So the laws relating to the severe ritual impurity of a zav appear in Leviticus chapter 15 and in Tractate Zavim. The zav becomes ritually impure as a result of the secretion of a white pus-like discharge from his member. A man who experiences a discharge of this kind on one occasion becomes ritually impure for 1 day, like a man who experienced a discharge of semen. If the man experiences a second discharge of this white pus-like substance on the same day or on the following day, Or if he experiences a prolonged initial discharge, then he contracts the more severe ritual impurity of a zav. Now he's a zav, which lasts 7 days. And if he experiences a third discharge within the next 24 hours, he's going to be impure for 7 days, and he is obligated to bring an offering as part of his purification process. You know, what's interesting about this is like, what exactly is it that causes a man to become a zav? They keep bringing up gonorrhea-like, symptoms. So if indeed it is some kind of gonorrhea, well, that would, probably indicate that he had extramarital sex. And so you could see why he would need, this enhanced purification, as it were. So in the laws governing secretions of a zav, the cause and frequency of the discharge are halakhically, legally significant. Before definitely determining that a man is a zav, an effort is made to determine if the discharge can be attributed to some other physical or mental condition. Although the sages distinguish between semen and discharge of a zav, this distinction is not always obvious. For this reason, it is possible that a particular discharge might not be that of a zav, but rather an unintentional discharge whose causes are listed in the Mishna. That he was sick, that he jumped, that he was aroused, all these other things, that it might be semen, it might be something else, but it might not be ziva. So a discharge is not considered the sign of a zav until it has been established as such by a repeated occurrence, right? One time only, they'll say he's impure, but he would be impure if it was semen anyway for a day. So a zava is a woman who experiences a discharge of blood at a time other than her normal menstrual period, and the laws of a zava are similar to those of a zav. Okay, so now we understand what it is a little bit better. Right, where am I? Okay, so the Mishna taught that a man's semen is impure, a source of tumah. So the Gemara asks, with regard to what law is the Mishnah teaching that semen of a zav is impure? If we say that this is referring to the impurity of contact, i.e. this semen renders one who touches it impure, well, there's no need to teach this law. Is it any worse than the semen of a man who is ritually pure, which also imparts impurity through contact? Rather, the Mishnah is teaching that the semen of a zav renders people impure even by carrying, which is a stronger form of tumah, stronger form of ritual impurity, something that, semen, if you touch it, you become impure. But if it's in a vessel, in a container, and you carry the container, you don't become impure. But ziva, if you carry it even in a container so that you don't touch the ziva itself, but you cause it to be moved by carrying it, you would become impure, ritually impure, and you have to immerse in the mikvah and go through the purification process. So the Gemara asks, who did you hear say that semen of a zav renders one impure by carrying? If we say it is this Tana, Rabbi of the Mishnah, as it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Eliezer says, the semen of a zav does not render one impure by carrying, and Rabbi Yehoshua says it does render one impure by carrying, because it is impossible for his semen to be without droplets of ziva. Right now we're talking about the semen of a zav, right, as opposed to just the semen of a regular person. The semen of a regular person imparts tumah through contact, but not by carrying. The semen, not the ziva, the semen of a zav has triggered this argument between Eliezer and Yehoshua. One who says, well, the semen of a zav is like the semen of anybody. It imparts tumah through contact, but not by carrying. Whereas Rabbi Yehoshua says, no, the plain semen, the regular semen of a zav is like ziva, and it does render one impure through carrying like ziva would. And what's his reason for that? Because it is impossible for the semen of a zav to be without droplets of ziva mixed into it. Yet this source is no proof, says the Gemara, as even Rabbi Yehoshua said that this semen imparts impurity by carrying only due to the droplets of ziva that it contains. However, he did not say that semen in its unadulterated form renders people impure. So rather, Rav Ada bar Ahava said, the Mishnah does not mean that the semen of a zav itself renders one impure by carrying. Rather, it comes to say that one does not attribute the ziva to it. Even if the man experienced a discharge within 24 hours of his ejaculation of semen, one does not say his discharge was triggered by a general weakening as a result of his seminal emission. Once the man has experienced 2 discharges of a zav, he is an impure zav, and his third discharge is also considered ziva, even if it resembles semen. Right? So whereas, as we'll see, if a person had a seminal emission, and then the next day, or within 24 hours of that, he had some kind of a flow, that's one of the reasons that we would say, oh, that discharge that comes within 24 hours of an ejaculation is caused by some kind of residue from the ejaculate, right? And is not ziva. Whereas if he, it was more than 24 hours after he had an ejaculation, and then we did these 6 other factors, he's not sick, he wasn't jumping up and down, he wasn't carrying a heavy burden, he wasn't aroused, after we question him about all these other things that it might have been, so then we're left to say, oh, well, then that might be ziva, and he's going to be impure for 1 day, as he would be anyway for semen. But if it repeats within 24 hours, now he becomes a zav and he's going to be impure for 7 days. Now, when he was before Rava, Rav Papa thought to say the following explanation of this law. Since he sees his discharges out of the weakness brought about from his previous ziva, it can be assumed that any later discharge, even one that follows a seminal emission, is ziva, right? The zav who's established as a zav. Now, anything that he, emits that isn't actually urine is going to be considered ziva. So Rava said to him, but didn't we learn in a Mishna, a convert who has just converted can immediately become impure as a zav, right? Gentiles do not become impure. The concept of ritual impurity, tuma, does not apply to Gentiles. It only applies to Jews. So, if a Gentile had whatever his emissions are, it doesn't change his status in terms of his purity. Gentiles are tahor. They don't become impure. They don't become tameh. But a former Gentile who has become a Jew, as soon as he becomes a Jew, could become impure in all the ways that Jews become impure, because a convert is a full-fledged Jew like any other Jew. So a convert who has just converted can immediately become impure as a zav if he has these emissions. Now, even if he had a seminal emission when he was a Gentile, see, as we've said, that if you have an ejaculation and then within 24 hours there's some kind of a flow, then we would say, well, that's not ziva because it's less than 24 hours after you had some kind of ejaculation. So, but when the Gentile becomes a Jew, it's like he's born at that moment. And the fact that he might have had an ejaculation prior to the conversion is not going to be, we're not going to factor that in, that, oh, this is within 24 hours of that other event, right? Now this is like, he didn't have that event because he's like a born again person. He's like a newborn person, even though he's an adult. So even if he had a seminal emission as a Gentile and subsequently converted and then experienced the discharge of a zav, one does not associate the discharge of a zav with the earlier emission of semen. Rather, it is treated as the first discharge of a zav. So in this case, there is no prior weakness of a zav to speak of, and nevertheless the convert is considered tameh, impure, as a zav. And Rav Papa said to Rava, well, there is no greater illness than this. The very acceptance of mitzvahs can be considered an illness. So what Rav Papa is saying is, okay, we're not going to attribute, this discharge that he has after conversion to something that happened before he converted. Whether he jumped up and down or he was ill or whatever before he converted doesn't matter. But the act of conversion and suddenly becoming obligated in hundreds of mitzvahs, that the Gentile was not obligated in before he converted to Judaism, and now he is obligated in all these laws, and if he, transgresses a Torah provision that applies to Jews, so now he's committed a sin, he's committed an avera, and he's going to be liable for that. And that the burden of all, it's a privilege, obviously, it's an opportunity, every commandment is an opportunity to connect with God. But the bottom line is, a person who was not obligated in all the commandments, who converts and now is suddenly obligated in all the commandments, well, that could, stress him out. And that kind of mental burden that suddenly he becomes aware, oh my gosh, I converted, now I'm obligated in all these things. If he has a discharge, within 24 hours of his conversion, it's like he has an illness. It's not that you have to be sick to become a Jew. It's not that we consider being Jewish a sickness, but the sudden taking on of all the mitzvahs by conversion is enough to be a little bit traumatic. And so if he has a flow, it would be like one of those 7 causes that are external, and that would not render him a zav. That's the point. This is a leniency that Rav Papa is establishing, so that this person doesn't become a Jew and instantly become impure as a zav if he should happen to have some kind of a flow. Now the Gemara comments, rather, the possibility that was rejected earlier, that the Mishna means that the semen of a zav imparts impurity by carrying, this is a dispute between the Tanaim. As it is taught in a Baraisa, the semen of a zav renders one impure by carrying, like the regular discharge of a zav for a 24-hour period. In other words, if a zav experienced a seminal emission within 24 hours of his ziva emission, the seminal emission does not impart impurity only through contact in the manner of semen of a pure individual, but by carrying as well. And Rabbi Yosei says that it imparts impurity by carrying only on its day, i.e. the seminal emission was before the evening of the day, if the seminal emission was before the evening of the day of the ziva. As opposed to Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua cited earlier, these Tanaim both maintain that the semen of a zav imparts impurity by carrying just like ziva does. One says for 24 hours, the other one says just until nightfall on that day. So the Gemara asks, with regard to what do the first Tana and Rabbi Yosei disagree? What is the basis of their dispute? And the Gemara answers, they disagree with regard to the following issue discussed by Shmuel, as Shmuel raises a contradiction. It is written, Deuteronomy 23:11, if there be among you any man who is not pure by reason of that which chances him by night, and then shall he go abroad out of the camp, he shall not come within the camp. One who is impure keeps a distance from other people so that it does not have contact with them and render them impure so that they could not enter the temple or bring offerings or eat consecrated food if they're priests. So this verse applied to a zav who experienced a seminal emission. As it is written, when evening comes on, he shall bathe himself in water, and when the sun is down, he may come within the camp, right? He may rejoin the company of the people. I'm almost done. If you have questions or comments, get them in. So the Gemara explains the dispute. The one who says that the semen of a zav imparts impurity by carrying for a 24-hour period after experiencing a ziva emission infers from the phrase when evening comes on that the period can involve 2 evenings, as comes on indicates another evening. If so, the semen imparts impurity by carrying for a full 24-hour period. And the other sage, Rabbi Yosei, and usually when Rabbi Yosei disagrees with anybody, the law is like Rabbi Yosei. And the other sage, Rabbi Yosei, infers from the expression, by reason of that which chances him by night, that the seminal emission imparts impurity by carrying only until that night, i.e. until the end of the day on which the man experienced the ziva, and then later he had the seminal emission. So the seminal emission itself imparts tuma by carrying, just like ziva, but it only does that until evening that day. If he then has a seminal emission that night, that semen would be like regular semen, imparts tuma by contact, but not by carrying. And the Gemara asks, but according to the one who says that this law is derived from the phrase when evening comes on, isn't it written by reason of that which chances him by night? And the Gemara answers, he could have said to you that this verse affords no proof, as it is referring to the usual case, and it is the manner of a seminal emission to occur at night. Consequently, one cannot derive a law from this expression. That concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 7 here in Tractate Nazir. There's just one short Mishna and one very short Gemara left, Mishna number 8, and we're going to save that to make the siyum, the completion celebration on Tractate Nazir on Wednesday morning before Passover begins next Wednesday night. And that will excuse me and other firstborns from fasting that day if you participate in a Sudas mitzvah, a mitzvah meal associated with completing a tractate. This is something that is often done. People will save a tractate to make a siyum on the morning of Passover for that reason. So we'll make our siyum next week on Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. Pacific. But tomorrow we will open the next tractate, Tractate Sota, the laws of the Sota, the suspected adulteress, and the procedure that we have, that the Torah spells out for dealing with that. All right, let's go to questions or comments on this final page of Tractate Nazir. Page 66. Lynn. Do Orthodox Jewish medical personnel immerse to cleanse from contact with these sources of tuma? I mean, in terms of immersing as an obligation, the answer is no. Right? They would when the temple is standing and we immerse, and we sort of go back to full observance of the laws of purity and impurity, which now are more the subject of study than a practical matter, with two exceptions. So there are two cases where people still immerse and make a bracha, right? They say the bracha because they're fulfilling a commandment when they immerse in the mikvah. One is the convert. Right, so somebody who is going to convert to Judaism, he or she immerses in the mikvah and says the blessing for immersing for conversion, for becoming a Jew, and that is an obligatory immersion. And the other is women, right? So the nida, women who are observing the laws of family purity. So each month, after their period ends, they count 7 days, clean days with no spotting, no bleeding, and then they immerse in the mikvah, and then the wife and husband become permitted to each other again until her next period begins. Other than that, like Hasidic men do have the custom, especially Chabad men, to immerse every day, but they don't say a blessing because it's not an obligatory immersion in the mikvah. It is a custom. Right? So, are you asking me, do people who come into contact with the dead and other sources of tuma immerse as a custom? That I can't speak to. I'm not aware of that. We wash our hands, and that's kind of related, but it's obviously not the same. It's not the same as immersion. So I can't really speak to that question and answer it with any competence, but it's a good question. That's what I've got for us today. So with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow to open Tractate Sota. Tomorrow's Friday, so it'll be the regular Friday time, noon Pacific, for our new tractate. Have a great night.